Naomi Prewitt is 61 years old, and every dawn for 2 winters she has walked a half-mile through frost to leave one warm loaf on Elias Vane's fence rail. He has never once said her name. Folks in Cottonwood Bend counted the mornings, 400 and some, and called her a foolish old woman. The rancher only nodded from his porch. "A man my age has no business being fed by a widow," he told the storekeeper. But on the 430th morning, the bread was gone before she reached the gate, and Elias Vane was standing in the road, holding something in his fist. If you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Subscribe before you go, and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The frost came early to Cottonwood Bend that year. It came in the last week of October, and it did not leave. By November, the ground rang like iron under a boot heel, and the wind that crossed the flat had nothing to slow it. No trees, no hills to speak of, just the long brown grass gone gray, and the sky, and the little houses set far apart like buttons dropped on a floor. Naomi Prewitt lived at the edge of that flat, in a house her husband had built and then died in. 11 years he had been gone. The house was low and plain. One room, a lean-to kitchen, a sod stable out back for the one horse, and the 3 hens that still bothered to lay. She had proved up on the quarter section alone. She had done it with her own 2 hands, and the doing of it had worn those hands down to something that looked older than the rest of her. She was 61. She did not feel old inside. That was the strange part. Inside, she was still a girl who liked the smell of rain. But the mirror told another story, and the town told a harder one, and most mornings she believed the town. She woke before the light. She always had. Her husband used to say her body kept a rooster in it. She would rise in the dark and stir the coals and feed them, and while the fire caught, she would stand at the little window and watch the black turn to gray and the gray turn to a thin pale gold along the bottom of the world. Then she baked. Bread was the one thing Naomi still did well. She knew it the way some women know a hymn, without thinking, her hands moving on their own. Flour and water and salt and the little crock of starter she kept warm by the stove all winter like a living thing. Her husband, God rest him, had never once complimented her on much. But he praised her bread. Every loaf of his life he praised it. And now that he was gone, she went on making it as if he might still come in stamping snow off his boots and say, "That's a fine loaf. Naomi, nobody said it now." That was the truth of her days. She made bread, and there was no one to eat it but herself, and a body can only eat so much bread. So she gave it away. It started 3 winters back. Word came through town that Elias Vane's wife had died, Margaret Vane. A good woman by every account, quiet and square-dealing, gone in a fever inside of a week. Naomi had met her twice, maybe 3 times, at socials. They had not been friends. But when the news came, something in Naomi turned over. She knew that house. She knew the shape of it from the inside without ever having entered. A man alone in a cold place, the sudden terrible quiet where a voice used to be. She had lived in that quiet for 8 years by then, and she would not have wished it on a dog. So the next morning she wrapped a warm loaf in a clean flour sackcloth, and she walked. It was a half-mile to the Vane fence, half a mile through the frost. In the dark, the loaf held against her chest to keep the warmth in it, and to keep the warmth in her. She did not knock. She would not have dared. She set the loaf on the top rail of his fence by the gate where he could not miss it. And she walked home. That was the first morning. There had been 400 and some since. She did it the way other people said their prayers, not because she expected an answer, because the doing of it was the thing. Because a person needs one act in a day that is only kindness, with no account kept, or else the cold gets all the way in. On the 431st morning she rose as always. She stirred the coals. She stood at the window, and when the gold came up thin along the edge of the flat, she baked. Elias Vane was 66 years old, and he had not lit his wife's bread oven in 3 years. He was a big man, or he had been. Grief had taken some of the size out of him, the way a long drought takes the green out of a field without moving a single fence post. He ran cattle on a section and a half of hard grass north of the town, and he ran them the way he did everything now, out of habit and stubbornness, because stopping seemed like a kind of dying, and he was not ready to die. He only felt ready. The ranch house had 2 rooms his wife had made warm, and 1 room she had made holy, and that was the kitchen. Margaret's kitchen. Her stove. Her oven, a good iron one he had freighted up from the railhead the year they married, 40 years past, and it had baked their whole life. Bread and pies and the Sunday roast. Their daughter had been born in the next room to the smell of it. Now it stood cold. He kept it clean. He would not let it rust or gather dust, but he would not light it either. He could not. The one time he had tried, that first winter alone, the smell of the fire coming up in that iron had put him on his knees on the floor like a felled ox, and he had crawled out of the room and not gone back in except to keep it clean. He ate cold biscuits from a tin. He ate cold beans out of the can with a spoon standing at the counter. He would rather go hungry than smell bread in that house, because bread in that house was Margaret, and Margaret was gone, and some doors a man cannot open and go on standing. He kept the widow's loaves. He could not have said why. The first one had made him angry. He remembered that. He had stood at the gate holding it, this warm thing in its clean cloth, and he had wanted to throw it in the road. He did not want pity. He did not want a stranger's kindness laid on his fence like a bill come due. But it was bread. And it was good bread. And a man does not throw away bread. So he took it inside, and he ate it standing up, and it was the first warm food he had tasted in 9 days. The next morning there was another. He told himself he would carry it back. He never did. He would take it in, and eat some, and the rest went stale on the counter, and he fed it to the chickens, and he told himself that was the only reason he took it, so it would not go to waste in the road. He knew that was a lie. He did not examine the lie too closely. A man his age is allowed a lie or two he does not examine. He knew who left it. Everyone knew. The whole of Cottonwood Bend knew that old Naomi Prewitt walked a half-mile every dawn to feed the widowed rancher, and the whole of Cottonwood Bend had an opinion about it. They called her foolish. That was the kind word. A foolish old woman with nothing better to do, throwing good flour over another body's fence. The unkind ones said worse. They said she was husband hunting. 61 and husband hunting, chasing a man who would not so much as say her name. They laughed about it at the store, and after church, lo, the way people laugh at a thing that makes them a little afraid. Because deep down, every one of them knew they would not have the courage to do what she did. To give and get nothing back, out in the open, where everyone could see you get nothing back. It takes a hard kind of brave to be laughed at every morning and go on walking. Once, in the general store, the storekeeper had said to him plain, "Elias, that woman is good to you. You might say a word to her." And Elias Vane had looked at his boots, and he had said the thing that he believed, the thing that was the whole shape of his grief, laid out in a single sentence. "A man my age has no business being fed by a widow," he said. And then, quieter, so quiet the storekeeper barely caught it, as if he were saying it to Margaret and not to the room, he said the other thing. The thing he had been carrying so long it had worn a smooth place in him. "Were I younger, she'd be my wife." He said it to the floor. He said it and did not know he had said it out loud, and he paid for his coffee and his tin of beans, and he rode home the long way so he would not have to pass her gate in the daylight. That was the size of it. He thought himself too old. Too late. A ruined old man with a cold oven and a heart 3 years in the ground. What could such a man offer a woman but more grief? Better to take her bread in silence and give her nothing, than to give her his half-lived life and call it a gift. He did not know she thought herself invisible. He did not know that the not answering, which he meant as mercy, she took as proof that she was nothing at all. Two people can stand a half-mile apart every dawn, and each be certain they are the one with nothing to give. Susanna came out to the ranch the second week of November. She was Elias's daughter, 34, married to a decent, dull man named Croft, who kept the feedlot in town. She came out every fortnight to see that her father had not frozen or starved or gone strange in the head from all the quiet. She loved him fiercely, and she showed it by scolding. She found him at the barn that day, mending a stanchion with hands too cold to hold the hammer well. She made him come in. She built the fire up in the front room, not the kitchen, never the kitchen, and she set about the place with a broom while she talked. "You're not eating," she said. "Look at you. You're all bones and beard." "I eat." "Cold beans is not eating, Papa." She stopped, the broom still. She looked at the counter, where a heel of bread sat in its worn cloth. She knew that cloth. Everyone knew that cloth. She's still leaving it then, she is, and you still won't tell her to stop. He did not answer that. He picked up the bread heel and turned it in his big hand and set it down again. Susanna watched him do it, and something crossed her face that she did not let him see. She was afraid of a thing she could not yet name. She loved her mother's memory, the way her father loved it, the way you love a light you are afraid the wind will take, and the sight of another woman's bread on her mother's counter frightened her out of all proportion. But she did not say that. Instead, she went to the sealed kitchen door, and she stood in it, looking at the cold oven, and she said the thing offhand, the way people throw away the words that matter most. "You should read Mama's letter someday. You know." He went very still. "The one she left you?" Susanna went on, dusting a shelf that did not need it, not looking at him. "It's still in her sewing box. I saw it when I looked for her thimble. She wrote it near the end. For you. And you never opened it. 3 years. Papa," she shrugged, a small, helpless shrug. "You'll read it when you're ready, I suppose." "I'm not ready," he said. "No," she said. "I don't reckon you are." And that was all. She said it and let it fall and moved on to the next shelf, and neither of them knew that she had just laid a hand on the one door in the whole house that could be opened, and that opening it would change everything. It sat in the sewing box in the cold kitchen. Margaret's last words. Unread, waiting, winter set its teeth in December. The snow came, and then the wind packed it hard, and then it came again. Naomi's flour ran low. She kept a barrel of it in the lean-to, bought in the fall against the whole white season, and she watched the level of it drop faster than it should. Because she was baking 2 loaves worth of flour a day and eating one and giving one away, and a widow's fall barrel is not bottomless. She did the sum one night by the lamp. She could keep the loaves coming, or she could eat proper herself. But not both. Not till the roads opened in spring and she could get to the store. She did not hesitate long. That was the thing about her that the town, laughing, never understood. She halved her own portion. She ate thin so the loaf could stay fat. She told herself it was good for her figure and laughed alone in the empty house at her own joke, and she went on walking the half-mile every dawn with a full, warm loaf held against a stomach that was not full. She did not know, could not have known, that Elias had begun to watch for her. He would not admit it was watching. He rose early, as ranchmen do, and it happened that his rising and her coming fell at the same gray hour, and it happened that his window looked toward the gate, and it happened that most mornings now he stood at that window in the dark with his coffee, and he watched a small bundled figure come across the white flat, half a mile of it, bent into the wind, and stop at his fence, and set down the loaf, and turn, and go back the way she came. Half a mile back. Into the wind both ways, some mornings, the way the wind will turn on you out there just to be cruel. Nobody had ever walked a mile in the cold for Elias Vane and asked for nothing. Not once in 66 years. His mother had loved him, but a mother is required. Margaret had loved him, but they had built that love as partners, an even trade, his strength for her warmth. This was different. This was a woman he had never given one word to, coming a mile through the dark, day on day on day, and taking nothing, and it did something to him that he had no name for and did not want to name, because naming it would be a kind of betrayal. One morning in the deep of December, before she came, he went out to the woodpile. He split a length of dry pine down small, kindling fine, easy to catch. He carried the split wood out to the fence in the dark, and he laid it on the top rail, by the gate, where she left the bread. Then he went back in and stood at the window and waited, and he was ashamed of himself for waiting, an old man watching a window like a boy. She came. She stopped at the rail. He saw her go still when she found the wood. He saw her stand there a long moment looking down at it. He could not see her face at that distance in that light. He was glad he could not. She set the loaf down where the wood was not. She took up the split pine in her arms, careful, like it might spill. And she went home carrying it. Neither of them ever spoke of it. It was the first thing he had ever given back. A little dry wood on a fence rail. It does not sound like much, but she carried it the whole half-mile home, with her arms full and her chest full, and she laid the fire that night with his wood, and she sat by it longer than she needed to, and for the first time in a long time, the house did not feel like it was only holding her until she died. A degree of thaw. You could not have measured it with any instrument God ever made. But it was there. Then came the Sunday that the whole town saw. It was clear that morning, the first clear morning in a fortnight, cold and bright and hard as glass. The roads had packed enough to travel, and the little congregation of Cottonwood Bend came in from all its scattered buttons of houses to the plain white church, because people who live far apart will forgive a great deal of cold for the chance to be near one another. Naomi came. She always came. She sat in the back in her one good dress, gone shiny at the elbows, and she sang the hymns in a voice that was still true. And nobody sat close to her, and she was used to that. Elias came too. That was rarer. He had gone hard against church since Margaret died, but Susanna had wheedled him into it, and he stood at the back in his black coat, like a fence post someone had dressed. And it happened, as such things happen, that they left at the same moment. The service let out into the cold bright noon, and the people flowed out and stood about in the churchyard talking, as country people do, unwilling to break apart. And Naomi had brought a loaf, because it was Sunday and she thought perhaps she would leave it at his gate on the way home as always. But he was there, right there, by the churchyard gate, not 30 feet from her, in the open, in the daylight, with the whole congregation stood about them like a jury. She could have set it down and slipped away. She almost did. But something in her, some small stubborn flame that 400 cold mornings had not quite put out, made her walk to him instead. Across the open yard, in front of everyone, with the loaf in her hands. The whole yard saw her do it. The talk did not stop all at once. It faded, the way a room goes quiet when something is about to happen, and 40 pairs of eyes turned. She held the loaf out to him. In the light, face to face. "Morning, Mr. Vane," she said. Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that after. "I brought your bread." And Elias Vane, who had taken 400 loaves off a fence rail and never once looked her in the eye, looked her in the eye. He took the bread from her hands. His big cold fingers touched her worn ones for half a second in the cold air. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. He had never given her 2 words. He gave them to her in front of the whole town. and the whole town began, at once, to murmur. You could hear it move through them like wind through the gray grass. The old widow and the old rancher. Look at her, chasing after him. Look at him, letting her. Foolish, foolish, Susanna stood by the church steps with her husband, and her face went white and then hard as she watched her father take another woman's bread, and something shut in her expression like a door pulled to. Naomi heard the murmur. She had ears. She felt the heat come up her neck. But she had done it now. She had crossed the open yard in the light, and she found she was not sorry. She dipped her head to him once, and she turned and walked out through the gate and down the road toward home, alone, with the whole town's whisper following her like a dog. Elias stood holding the bread and watched her go, and he did not know that it was the most any two people in that churchyard had said to each other in 3 years, and he did not know that it had cost her everything she had to say it, and he did not know yet what it was going to cost him. Kettering came 4 days later. He rode out from town on a good horse, in a good coat, and he was a polite man, which was the worst thing about him. Mr. Alonzo Kettering, agent of the Cottonwood Valley Stockman's Bank. He sat his horse in Elias's yard and did not get down, and he was sorry, so very sorry, but business was business. The winter had killed a third of Elias's herd already, and it was not half over. The note on the ranch was $600, come due at the turn of the year, and the bank could not see its way to carrying it further. Not with the herd the way it was. Not with cattle prices where they were. 40 days, Mr. Vane, pay the $600, or the bank would be obliged, most regretfully, to bring the place to auction. He was so polite about it. He tipped his hat when he said the word auction. That was the arrogance of the man, though he'd have died before he called it that. He was polite because he was certain. Certain that an old man with a dead wife and a dying herd would not fight, could not fight, would simply fold up quiet the way old people were supposed to fold, and let the bank take the place and count it a mercy that it was done politely. Elias listened. He did not argue. He did not have $600, and both men knew it. He said, "I'll see what I can do," which was a thing to say and not a thing that meant anything, and Kettering tipped his hat again and turned his good horse and rode back to town. Elias stood in his yard a long time after the sound of the hooves was gone. 40 days. $600 he did not have and could not raise, not with the roads shut and the market down and the herd freezing on the hoof. The ranch Margaret had helped him build. The kitchen with her cold oven in it. The room their daughter was born in. All of it, come the auction, sold off the steps to the highest bidder while he stood by and watched. He told no one. Not Susanna, not the storekeeper, certainly not the widow with her bread. What did a ruined old man have to say to anybody? He had been half a man before, a man with a cold oven and a grave in his chest. Now he was to be a man with nothing at all. Not even a roof. His self-erasure, which had been a soft and mournful thing, a sad old man's habit, got teeth in it that day. Before, he had thought himself too old to offer a woman anything. Now, he knew himself too poor besides. He was glad, in a bitter way, that he had never said the words out loud to her. Better she thought him cold than knew him beggared. He went in and ate his cold beans standing at the counter. The heel of her last loaf sat in its cloth beside him, and he could not eat it. He wrapped it back up careful, and he did not know why. Word of trouble travels faster than any other kind in a small place. Within the week the town knew the Vane note was called, and within the week Naomi knew it too, because she stood at the store counter and heard 2 men say it low, and heard one of them laugh and say the old fool would lose it all, and good riddance to a hard luck outfit. She did not laugh. She went home, and she thought. She could not give Elias Vane $600. She had, in the coffee tin, buried under the loose board by her stove, a little better than 40. Her whole earthly savings, 11 years of it, 40-some dollars against a rainy day she had always known would come. 40 against 600. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. But her hands could do what her purse could not. His fence was down along the north line. She had seen it from the road, the wire sagging, posts leaning where the frost had heaved them, and a rancher with a called note and a freezing herd has no time to mend fence. So she went. In the raw cold, with her husband's old fencing pliers that she had kept all these years. She walked his north line, and she pulled the wire tight, and she set the leaning posts, and she mended the gaps. An old woman working a fence a half-mile from her house that was not hers and would never be hers. And she asked no one, and told no one, and simply did it because it wanted doing, and her hands still worked. She left the loaf now with an egg beside it. One of the 3 her hens still gave her, set careful on the rail so it would not roll. A little more protein for a man wearing thin. She never signed it. She never knocked. And once, when the day was clear enough to see him working the cattle far out on the flat, forking hay to the poor freezing beasts alone, she rode her old horse out along the road and stopped, and sat there in the cold at a distance, not close enough to intrude, just close enough that if he lifted his head, he would see he was not the only living soul under that enormous empty sky. She sat there an hour. Then she rode home. She did not know if he had seen. He had seen. He forked hay with his back to her the whole hour, and he had never in his life been so aware of another person's presence, a small, still figure horseback on the road, keeping him company across a quarter-mile of snow, and saying nothing, asking nothing, only there. At the church social before Christmas, he watched her take her coffee. He had never noticed how a person takes their coffee before in all his years. She took it black, no sugar, both hands wrapped round the cup for the warmth of it, holding it up near her face between sips like it was something she was grateful for. He watched her do it from across the room, and he memorized it. Black, no sugar, both hands. He could not have said why he needed to know it. He knew it now for the rest of his life. Approach, a small gesture. Retreat, then again. Each one a degree. The thaw came on so slow that neither of them could have told you it was happening, but the ice was going, a degree at a time, across the whole hard face of that winter. Then the great blizzard came, the one they would talk about for years, and it caught Naomi Prewitt out. She had walked the loaf out later than usual that morning, held up by a hen gone off her nest, and the sky that had been only gray turned the color of a bruise while she stood at his fence, and the wind came up all at once out of the north, with the snow inside it, and the world went white between one breath and the next. She could not see the gate. She could not see her own hand. Half a mile of open flat lay between her and her house, and in that white a body could walk in a circle till it lay down, and did not get up. People died that way within sight of their own doors, and did not know the door was there. She did the only thing there was to do. She turned toward the one house she could still find, because it was close, and she followed his fence line. The fence she herself had mended, hand over hand along the top wire, like a blind woman along a rope, and it led her to his gate and up his path to his door, and she beat on it with a fist gone numb. He pulled her in out of the white. He half carried her to the front room fire, this small woman, crusted white and shaking, and he wrapped her in a blanket off his own bed, and he chafed her hands between his, and it was the first time in 3 years he had touched a living person with any tenderness, and neither of them thought a thing of it. Because the storm was screaming at the windows, and there was no room in it for anything but the getting warm. The storm did not let up. It howled all that day, and toward the dark it was worse, and they both knew she was not walking home that night, and they both knew what the town would say, and they both, for once, did not care, because the storm was chaperone enough. No man and woman are improper who are only trying not to freeze. The storm made it decent by making it life and death. But they had to eat. There was almost nothing in the house. Cold beans, a little bacon, No bread but the frozen loaf she had carried, hard as a stone now from the cold. She said she could make bread, if there was flour, if there was an oven. There was flour, a good sack of it Margaret had bought her last fall and never opened, still in the pantry these 3 years. And there was an oven. There was Margaret's oven. Naomi did not know what she was asking. She saw only the cold iron stove in the sealed kitchen, and she said, plain and practical, half frozen and hungry, "If you'll let me light your oven, Mr. Vane, I'll have hot bread on this table inside 2 hours." And Elias Vane went white to the lips and could not speak. She saw it then. She saw the shape of what she'd stepped into. She had heard the town talk of the sealed kitchen and the cold oven, and had thought it only an old man's odd grief. Standing there in his wife's blanket, she understood at last that the room had a door, and that the door was a grave, and she was sorry, and she began to say, never mind, cold beans would do, but he had crossed the kitchen. His hand was on the sealed door, and the wind screamed at the glass, and something in him that had held for 3 cold years, some rope pulled taut since the day they carried Margaret out, began, at last, to give. The door had not been opened in 3 years. The hinges had rusted into their silence. Elias put his hand flat against the wood and pushed, and it gave with a sound like a small animal waking, and then the cold breath of that sealed room came out to meet them both. Naomi stood behind him with the blanket round her shoulders. She did not go in. She let him go first. It was his door to open. The kitchen was just as Margaret had left it. A cup on the shelf. A dish towel folded over the rail of the stove, gone gray with dust, and there, black and cold in the corner, the iron oven that had not held a fire since the morning they carried her out. Elias stood in the middle of the room and looked at it all. His shoulders were shaking. Naomi thought, for one long moment, that she had done a terrible thing. Then he said, "She kept the flour in that bin." There, and his voice broke clean in half on the word. Naomi went to work. That was her gift, and she knew it. She did not try to hold him or say a soft word. She rolled up the sleeves of a dead woman's blanket, and she opened the flour sack Margaret had bought last fall and never lived to open, and she measured, and she kneaded, and she laid a fire in the cold iron belly of that oven with the dry stove wood he had once left on her rail. The kindling caught. The fire took, and slow, the room began to warm. When the smell of baking bread came up out of that oven, the first time in 3 years that smell had filled the Vane house, Elias Vane sat down at his wife's table and put his big hands over his face and wept. He did not hide it. He was 66 years old, and he wept like a boy, and the storm screamed at the glass, and the bread rose gold and warm in Margaret's oven. Naomi let him. She stood at the stove with her back half turned to give him the mercy of not being watched, and she waited. And when he had cried it all out, when the loaf was done, and she set it steaming on the table and cut the heel of it and put it in front of him with a little of the bacon grease, he looked up at her. His eyes were red and clear. "Naomi," he said. That was all. Just her name. But he had never said it. 400 mornings and more, and he had never once said it, and now he said it across his own table with the bread between them. "Yes," she said. "I'm here." The storm blew itself out in the night. By morning the world was white and still and hard, and she walked home a half-mile through the drifts, and the town saw her go, and the town talked. She did not care. She had heard him say her name. Spring was slow coming that year. The thaw did not truly break until near the end of the first week of April, when the snow went off the south slopes and the road ran to mud. And on the first true morning of the thaw, Naomi Prewitt did a thing she had not done in over 430 days. She did not leave the bread on the fence. She wrapped the warm loaf in the flour sack cloth, the same worn cloth from the very first morning, and she walked the half-mile, and she came up to the Vane house, and she walked past the fence rail where the bread had always sat. She went up the porch steps, and she raised her hand, and she knocked on his door. She had never knocked on his door, for 11 years a widow, and for 2 of them a ghost who left bread and vanished before the gate. She had made herself small enough to leave no mark on the world. Certain she was invisible, certain she did not matter. And now she stood on his porch in the mud of spring, with her heart going like a girl's, and she knocked, and she waited to be seen. The door opened. Elias filled it, big and gray and still in his shirt sleeves. "I brought your bread," she said. "But I thought I'd bring it in, if you'll have me. I'm tired of the fence, Elias. It's a cold place to leave a thing you made warm." He stood back from the door. "Come in then," he said. "The table's set." And she carried the loaf inside, past the door, and she set it on his table with her own 2 hands, not on the rail, on the table, in the house, where she could be seen. That was the morning it all changed, and both of them knew it. What came after was not a courtship of pretty words. Neither of them had any. It was a courtship of hands. She cooked. Lord, she cooked. She filled that house with the smells it had done without for 3 years, and Margaret's oven ran warm every day now. And it did not feel like theft anymore. It felt like keeping the fire the way Margaret had kept it. And he, for his part, took his hammer and his good arm out to her failing quarter section, and he set his shoulder under the sagging ridge of her homestead roof and made it straight. He mended what her husband's death had left broken 11 years back. He did with his hands what he could not do with his mouth. They drove to town together on a Saturday, the 2 of them up on the wagon seat, in plain sight, and they let the talk happen. Let Cottonwood Bend murmur. The old widow and the old rancher, side by side on the seat like they had a right to it. She sat straight and did not drop her eyes. She was done being invisible. But the debt did not stop for love. Kettering's 40 days were running out, grain by grain. Elias knew it, and Naomi did not the whole of it, not the true shape of the whole. He was too proud to let her see. When a man is courting a woman, he does not want her to know he is drowning. So he sold off his good saddle. He sold the spare team. He sold a 1.5 sections of grazing lease to a neighbor for far less than it was worth, and it was not enough. It was nowhere near enough, and every dollar he raised in secret, so that she would come to a supper and never see the empty places on the walls where the harness used to hang. And in the middle of it, Harmon Doyle came calling. Doyle kept the general store. He was a widower too, a kind and steady man, and he had watched Naomi Prewitt count her pennies over his counter for years, and he had made up his mind. He came to her homestead on a Sunday with his hat in his hands, and he said his piece plain. "Naomi," he said, "I'll not dress it up. You're proving up a place that's beating you. Winters out here'll kill you one of these years. Alone, I've a warm store and rooms behind it, and a good stove that never goes cold. Marry me, and you'll not carry another loaf through the frost as long as you live. No scandal to it. No talk. Just a warm place, and a man who'd be good to you." And the terrible thing was, it tempted her. Not him, she did not love him. But the ease of it, the warm store, the never being cold again. She was 61, and her body was giving out by inches, and here was a good man offering her the rest of her days by a fire that never died. "You're a kind man, Harmon Doyle," she said, "and I thank you. But I've given my mornings to somebody else." "He's an old man near ruined," Doyle said, gentle, not cruel. "You'd be trading my warm store for a cold ranch the bank's about to take." "I know it," she said, "and I'd still take the ranch." He put his hat back on. He did not argue. A good man knows when he has lost, and keeps his dignity. "Then, I hope he knows what he's got," Doyle said, and he went. That same week, Elias opened the letter. He had carried it in his mind for 3 years, the last letter, sealed in Margaret's sewing box, The thing Susanna kept saying he'd read when he was ready. He had never been ready. To read it was to hear her voice one last time, and then have no more of her voice forever. He had not been able to bear it. But that evening, with the smell of Naomi's bread still in the house and his heart torn two ways, he went into the cold kitchen that was not cold anymore, and he opened the sewing box, and he took out the letter, and he sat down by Margaret's oven and read his dead wife's hand. She had written it near the end, when she knew. The hand was weak. And what she wrote plain. Elias, my dear old man, I know how you are. I know you'll seal up this kitchen like a tomb and eat cold biscuits and call it faithful. Don't you do it. Don't you dare turn my house into a grave. Warm it again. Light my oven. And if a good woman ever comes to your door, and one will, you are too fine a man to be left alone, you open that door and you let her in, and you spend 1 hour feeling you've robbed me. You cannot rob the dead, Elias. We have everything already. Give the living what they need. Do not turn a widow from your door on my account. Be happy, you stubborn thing. That's the last order I'll give you. Mind it. Elias sat a long time with the letter in his lap. The oven ticked as it cooled, and something that had been shut for 3 years came all the way open and stayed open, and he was not afraid of it anymore. The dead had given her blessing. He was free. It was the next evening, on the porch, that the title of his whole grief came out of his mouth and stopped halfway. They were sitting out in the blue dusk, the two of them, the day's work done. Her hand was on the arm of the chair between them, worn thin with flour and years. And Elias reached over and took it. He held it in his big rough hand, and he looked at it, and he felt the whole of what he wanted rise up in him. Naomi, he said, and his voice was not steady. Were I younger, Naomi, you'd be my wife. And there he stopped. He let go of her hand. He looked out at the dark. Ashamed of his 66 years and his empty accounts and the note the bank was about to call. Ashamed to ask a woman to marry a ruined old man, and so he said the wanting, and then he cut its throat in the same breath. Were I younger? As if the years were the thing standing between them. As if he had not just been given, in his dead wife's own hand, the only blessing he had waited 3 years to hear. Naomi took her hand back into her lap. She did not cry. She had spent too many years being invisible to make a scene about being half-wanted. You're as young as you'll ever be tonight, Elias, she said, and she rose and went in and left him with the dark. But she had heard him. Were I younger, you'd be my wife. It was the closest thing to a proposal she had had in 11 years, and it had died on his lips, and she carried it home the next dawn like a stone. That would have been trouble enough. But the town made it worse. It was Susanna who broke it open. Elias's daughter, 34 and married to Croft, and frightened half out of her wits that some scheming old widow was working her grieving father for the last acre he had. She had watched the wagon rides. She had heard the talk. And when she came on Naomi at the general store, in front of Doyle's full counter and half of Cottonwood Bend, she said it out loud. You, Susanna said, the bred widow. I know what you're about. My father's near ruined, the whole town knows it, and here you come with your loaves and your eggs, sniffing after a dying man's land. My mother's not cold 3 years, and you'd move into her house. You ought to be ashamed. The store went dead quiet. Every head turned. And there it was again, the old mockery, the thing the town had whispered for 2 winters, said now to Naomi's face by the dead woman's own daughter. Naomi stood very still. She could have fought it. She had the truth on her side, and she knew it. But she looked at Susanna's face, twisted up with fear for her father, and she understood that whatever she said, if she took Elias, this girl would carry it as a wound the rest of her life. She would cost him his daughter. And she would carry the name schemer into whatever few years she had left. She would not do it. "I'm sorry you think so ill of me," Naomi said, quiet, in front of them all. "I've wanted nothing from your father but his company. But a woman my age has learned when she's not welcome. I'll trouble the Vane place no more." And she picked up her small parcel, and she walked out with her head up, and she went home, and the next dawn the fence rail was bare. It was bare the next dawn too, and the one after that. 3 mornings the rail stood empty, and Elias Vane, standing at his window in the gray before light the way he had stood for 2 winters, watching for a woman who did not come, believed it was his own words that had driven her off. Were I younger? He thought he had shamed her with his half a heart. He did not know what Susanna had done at the store. He said nothing, because a man who has cut his own throat has nothing left to say. And so the 2 of them sat a half-mile apart in the silence, each certain they had lost, and the fence rail stayed bare, and the bank clock ran down to 0. The auction was set for the 2nd week of November. The morning it came gray and hard, with the first true cold of winter on it. Kettering rode out from town with his papers and 2 men from the county and a little folding table, polite as ever, certain as ever, ready to nail his notice to the gatepost and sell a ruined old man's ranch out from under him at the going rate. He had done it a dozen times. Old people did not fight. That was the whole of his arithmetic. They signed, and they wept, and they went to live with their children, and the bank took the land. It was tidy. He got down off his horse, and he opened his little table, and he set his papers on it, and he began, in his soft, polite voice, to read the terms of the sale aloud. And then the road filled up. They came on foot, and on horseback, and on wagons. Neighbors, the men Naomi had fed cold mornings for 2 winters, the ones who'd ridden past her at dawn and seen her sitting her horse at Elias's fence, keeping a lonely man company while he forked hay. The storekeeper's boy. 2 ranchers from up the valley, old men and young ones, a whole slow gathering of ordinary decent people, filling up the yard between Kettering and the gatepost, and at the front of them came Naomi Prewitt. She had a book under her arm. The county record book. She set it on Kettering's little folding table, and she opened it to a page she had marked, and she put her flour-worn finger on the line. "Mr. Kettering," she said, loud enough for the yard to hear, "before you sell this man's home, you'll want to have your figures right. Your bank valued Elias Vane's land at the price of raw prairie. But it isn't raw. 40 years he's worked it. There's a mile of fence and 2 wells dug by hand, and a barn raised in 71, and a spring house and a section of broke sod, and none of it is in your valuation. It's all right here in the county book, filed and dated. You've called a $600 note against a property your own paper undervalues by half." Kettering's polite face did not move for a moment. Then it moved. That would be a matter for the bank to review," he said. "Then review it," said Naomi. "Here, now before witnesses." And she reached into her coat, and she brought out a small, heavy thing wrapped in cloth, and she set it down on the papers with a thump. It was a coffee tin. She took the lid off. It was full of paper money and hard coin, $40 and more. Every cent she had saved under the loose board by her stove against her own bad winter. "That's mine toward it," she said, "and these men have the rest between them, if it comes to that. Loaf by loaf I've fed half this valley for 2 winters, Mr. Kettering, and it turns out that buys a thing your bank never counted on. It buys people who'll stand in a yard on a cold morning." And the men behind her began to speak, one after another. "I'll cover 20 of it. I'll take his note myself before I'll see the bank have it. Put my name down." The polite certainty in Kettering's face, the whole tidy arithmetic that old people do not fight, came apart right there in the Vane yard in front of everybody. Because these old people had fought. And they had brought a book, and a coffee tin, and a valley full of neighbors, and it was all of it lawful. Every cent of it decent and above board. and there was nothing at all he could do. Kettering closed his little table. He gathered his papers with hands that had lost their surety. "The bank will review the valuation," he said stiffly. "There appears to be an error." And that was all the surrender a man like that could make. But it was enough. The note would be met. The ranch was saved. Lawfully, in daylight. By ordinary people. And Elias Vane stood on his own porch steps and watched a woman he had let walk home, unanswered, for 430 mornings save his life with a book and a coffee tin, and he understood, at last and all at once, exactly what he had been throwing away. He came down the steps. The yard went quiet again, but a different quiet. He walked up to Naomi in front of the whole gathered valley. He reached into his coat, and he took out the letter, Margaret's letter, the one that had sat unread 3 years, and he unfolded it with his big hands shaking, and he read it aloud. Right there. So that Susanna, standing white-faced at the edge of the crowd, would hear her own mother's voice. He read the part that mattered. If a good woman ever comes to your door, you open that door and you let her in. You cannot rob the dead, Elias. Do not turn a widow from your door on my account. Be happy, you stubborn thing. Susanna put her hand over her mouth. She was hearing her mother forgive the very thing she'd tried to stop. Elias folded the letter back up. He turned to Naomi. "I told you once," he said, and his voice carried across the whole still yard, "that were I younger, you'd be my wife. I was a fool and a coward when I said it. The years were never the thing standing between us, Naomi, I was. The theft was never going to be against Margaret, she just told you all so herself. The only theft was the mornings, 430 of them, when you walked home in the frost and I stood at my window and never once opened my door and said your name." He got down. 66 years old and his knees bad, he got down on the cold ground in front of them all. "I'm not younger," he said. "I'm never going to be younger. And I am asking you anyway. Marry me, Naomi Prewitt. Come in off the fence for good. There's no younger man's excuse left in me, only an old one who finally opened the door." Naomi Prewitt, who had spent 11 years certain she was invisible, stood in a yard full of people who were all, every one of them, looking straight at her. "Get up, you stubborn thing," she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle. "Get up. Of course I will. I've been at your gate every dawn for 2 winters. What took you so long to open it?" And he got up, and he took her flower-worn hand, and this time he did not let it go. The day after, Susanna came to Naomi's homestead. She did not come easy. She stood in the door a while before she stepped through it, and then she crossed the room and set a small jar down on the table. Margaret's own sourdough starter, the living heart of a dead woman's bread, kept fed 3 years in a cold house. "Mama would have wanted you to have this," Susanna said. Her eyes were red. "I was afraid. I thought you'd take him from us. I didn't understand you were giving him back." She looked at her hands. Papa smiles again. "I heard him. Out in the barn. He was humming. He hasn't hummed since Mama." She swallowed. "Thank you. That's all. Thank you." And that was the daughter's blessing, and it was worth more than the whole gathered valley, because it was the hardest one to earn. Harmon Doyle came by at dusk that same week. He tipped his hat on the porch and he did not come in. "I heard," he said. "I came to wish you well, Naomi. No bitterness in it. A man knows when the better road was never his to take." And he set down on the step a good full sack of white flour, the best in his store. "For the wedding bread," he said. "See, it's baked right." And he tipped his hat again and went, and he kept every ounce of his dignity, which was the only thing he had ever really been able to offer her, and the finest thing he had. They were married the 2nd week of November, in the ranch yard, 1 year almost to the day since Kettering first rode out. The same congregation that had murmured at the church gate 2 winters back, the old widow and the old rancher, foolish, mismatched, That same congregation filled the Vane yard now, in their Sunday best, come to see it done. Margaret's oven baked the wedding bread. It ran hot all that morning, and Naomi's hands and Susanna's hands worked side by side at the board, and the loaves came out gold. Loaf after loaf, and they were laid on a long shared table in the yard. The very loaves that had once sat cold and alone on a fence rail were now warm on a table with a whole valley gathered round to eat them. And Kettering, for what it was worth, sent word the note was marked paid in full. One of his clerks, they say, muttered in the bank office that the bred widow had outfoxed the whole outfit, book and coin, and a yard full of neighbors, and there wasn't a thing in the ledgers to be done about it. 6 months on, it was autumn again. A loaf sat cooling on the windowsill of the Vane house, a house that was not a shrine anymore, only a home, warm all through, the kitchen the warmest room in it. And on the porch, in the gray before light, in the hour that had once belonged to a lonely half-mile walk through the frost, 2 old people sat side by side on a swing. They did not talk much. They never had needed to. He took his coffee the way she'd taught him to notice she took hers, though he still put sugar in his, and she still teased him for it. Her head was on his shoulder. The dawn came up pink over the sod he'd worked 40 years, the sod they'd saved together with a book and a tin and a yard full of decent people. In a drawer inside, folded soft, lay the flour sackcloth from the very first loaf, the one she'd left on the bare cold rail 430 mornings running. It kept company in that drawer with Margaret's letter. The 2 of them tucked together, the woman who'd said go on and love again, and the cloth that had carried the love the whole long way. Neither one cold anymore. Naomi Prewitt watched the sun come up from the porch of a house that had opened its door, and she was not invisible, and she had not walked home alone in over a year, and she thought, the way you think a thing you already know all the way down to the bone, that it had never once been the years that were too few. It was only ever the mornings we leave unanswered. If you know a soul out there still leaving bread on somebody's cold rail, waiting for a door to open, comment the town you're watching from, and let this story travel to them.